My name is Ashley Walker and I'm 28 years old. 4 years as an Army combat medic in Iraq taught me to face chaos head-on, but nothing hit harder than a call that came during what should have been family dinner time 6 p.m. when families share stories over a warm meal. I was in the mess hall when my grandfather's voicemail came through, his voice so faint I could barely hear it. Ashley, not doing so good. Your parents aren't picking up. The tremble in his words froze me. I'd heard that tone before, soldiers on the edge of losing it all. My grandfather never asked for help, not once. I hit replay, my gut screaming something was wrong, and started pulling every string for emergency leave. What I found broke me: a house abandoned, my grandfather dying alone in silence, and a betrayal that burned deeper than any battlefield wound. My parents and brother, they were in Hawaii, splashing wine in Facebook photos, grinning like they hadn't a care. I opened my grandfather's safe, pulled out the will he'd hidden, and 1 week later my phone lit up with 33 missed calls. Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know what time you're listening right now and which city you're in. It's incredible to see how far these real experiences reach. Iraq had forged me, sprinting through gunfire to stabilize teammates' hands steady on tourniquets, dragging soldiers to safety in brutal missions. My unit was family-bound by trust civilians couldn't grasp. Weeks earlier, we'd handled a rapid response to a field injury, saving a sergeant under pressure. Captain noticed me glued to that voicemail later, my food untouched. "Walker, talk to me," he said. I played at my grandfather's plea and a whisper about my brother borrowing money years ago, never repaid for his so-called business. Captain pushed my leave through, saying, "Go fix this." The flights were a haze, my calls to my parents hitting voicemail. I didn't warn them I was coming, partly to surprise, partly to see what they were hiding. In Denver's suburbs, my grandfather's house loomed, yard choked with weeds, porch buried in newspapers. The spare key was still under the rock. Inside, the air reeked of illness. "Grandfather, it's Ashley." Silence. Upstairs, he lay still, chest barely moving, skin burning. I checked his pulse, weak, fading, and dialed 911, my voice steady but rage boiling. This wasn't neglect. This was betrayal, and I'd make them pay. Before I dive deeper into this story, I'd love to know what time you're listening right now and which city you're in. It's incredible to see how far these real experiences reach. My hands shook as I relayed Grandpa's condition to the 911 dispatcher, my combat medic training, keeping my voice steady despite the panic clawing at me. Male 79, severe dehydration, missed heart meds, signs of malnutrition, probable pneumonia onset. The paramedics arrived fast, bursting through the front door of the quiet Denver suburban house. I identified myself as a combat medic, rattling off vitals and symptoms to Megan, the lead paramedic, who nodded as she hooked up an IV. "Good call getting here when you did," she said, her tone grim. Another day, and he might not have made it. In the ambulance, I gripped Grandpa's frail hand, his skin paper-thin, veins stark under the fluorescent light. His eyes flickered open, unfocused but locking onto mine. "Ashley, you shouldn't be here," he rasped, guilt in his voice. "Your service?" I squeezed his hand. "I'm right where I need to be." But my mind was racing, piecing together the neglect, unopened meds, moldy dishes, the house falling apart. This wasn't a one-day oversight. This was weeks of abandonment, and I couldn't shake the image of my parents and David sipping cocktails in Hawaii, their Facebook posts mocking me with their carefree captions. Back in Iraq, my life had been a cycle of high-stakes missions. Just 3 weeks before my unit had scrambled to a field injury, soldiers hit during a patrol, chaos everywhere. I'd sprinted to Private Alex Martinez, blood soaking his leg, and applied a tourniquet while shouting for cover. Specialist Megan Garcia dragged him behind a barrier as I worked bullets kicking up dust nearby. Lieutenant Kevin Miller and Sergeant Ryan Collins made it out too, thanks to our teamwork. "Walker, you're a machine under pressure," Captain Brandon Young had said, later clapping my shoulder. That moment stuck with me, trust forged in crisis, the kind of bond my real family seemed to lack. It was Captain Brandon who'd noticed me unraveling after Grandpa's voicemail. I'd been sitting alone in the mess hall replaying it, his frail voice cutting through the noise of clattering trays. "Something's off, Walker," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. I told him about Grandpa, how he'd raised me during my parents' endless self-discovery trips, how my brother David had borrowed $3,000 from me before I deployed, claiming it was for his startup. I'd wired it from my savings, trusting him, only to learn later he'd blown it on a trip to Vegas with his wife. Captain didn't hesitate. "File for emergency leave. I'll pull strings." The process wasn't easy. Paperwork approvals, signatures from multiple officers. Military bureaucracy moved like molasses without hard proof of a crisis. I called my parents' phones, then David's over and over, straight to voicemail. Grandpa's line rang dead too. Captain Brandon called in favors, citing my record. "Your gut's telling you something, Walker. That's enough for me," he said. When the leave finally cleared, my unit gathered at the airstrip. "Don't get soft on us stateside." Megan Garcia teased her hug tight. Ryan Collins, gruff as ever, muttered, "Take care of your grandpa, then get back here." The journey to Denver was a blur. Military transports, commercial flights, layovers, where I kept dialing each unanswered call, twisting the knot in my stomach tighter. I didn't tell my family I was coming. Part of me wanted to see their faces when I walked in unannounced, but another part, the part sharpened by years in a war zone, wanted to catch them off guard to see what they were hiding. Landing in Denver, the quiet suburbs felt surreal after Iraq's chaos. The taxi driver glanced at my uniform, my duffel bag heavy at my feet. "Homecoming?" he asked. I shrugged. "Something like that." When I stepped into Grandpa's house, the neglect hit like a punch. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence, the air thick with that unmistakable smell of illness I knew from field hospitals. My boots echoed as I moved upstairs, calling his name. Finding him in that bedroom, barely breathing, flipped a switch in me. As the paramedics loaded him onto the stretcher, Megan, the paramedic, asked, "You trained in the field?" I nodded, handing her his unopened pill bottles. 4 years in Iraq. "You learned to move fast." She shook her head. "He's lucky you showed up." At the hospital, they rushed Grandpa to the ER, leaving me in the waiting room, helpless, a stark contrast to the control I'd had in combat. My medic instincts screamed to act, but here I was, just a granddaughter, not a soldier. I pulled out Grandpa's phone, which I'd grabbed with his wallet, needing answers. A text thread from 3 weeks ago stopped me cold. He'd written to my mom, "Not feeling well, trouble with meds. Can you come by?" Her reply, "Busy with work, Dad. Call a neighbor." He texted again, desperate, "Please, I don't feel right." No response. Then I saw David's name in the thread. "Mom's swamped, Grandpa. I'll handle it." But he didn't. The next day, they'd all jetted off to Hawaii, leaving him alone. I opened Facebook on my phone, and there they were, my parents, and David, tanned and laughing in beach photos. "Paradise vibes," one caption read, posted while Grandpa was starving in his bed. Another showed David's wife raising a wine glass, time-stamped 2 days after his last text. My hands clenched, the betrayal sinking in deeper. David, the brother I'd trusted with my savings, had lied again. He wasn't just neglecting Grandpa, he was part of something uglier. I needed proof, and I needed it now. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, I stared at Grandpa's phone, the text thread burning into my eyes. My mom's dismissal, "Busy with work, Dad. Call a neighbor," and David's lie, "I'll handle it," felt like knives. They'd left him to rot while posting beach selfies in Hawaii. I scrolled through their Facebook again, each photo twisting the blade deeper. My parents, tanned and grinning, captioned one post, "Living our best life." David's wife held a wine glass in another, her kids splashing in the ocean, time-stamped the day after Grandpa's desperate plea. My brother, who'd conned me out of $3,000 for his fake startup, was at it again, lying, abandoning, profiting. I dialed my mom's number, my thumb hovering before hitting call. The line rang 4 times before she picked up, laughter and music spilling through the background. "Ashley, honey." What a surprise! Her voice was syrupy, slurred from drinks. Where are you? I asked, keeping my tone even though my grip on the phone tightened. Oh, we're just in Hawaii, a little getaway. Much needed break, with all the stress of looking after your grandfather. She giggled, the sound grating like sandpaper. Stress, I snapped. I'm sitting in the ICU with Grandpa right now. He's in critical condition, dehydrated, malnourished, missed his heart meds for weeks. Alone. Silence stretched. Then she stammered, That's impossible. We arranged everything. David's been checking on him. Her tone shifted sharp now. You left us to play soldier, Ashley. David stepped up while you were off in your war zone. The guilt trip hit hard, dragging me back to that moment I'd wired David the money, believing his sob story about a business deal. He'd partied in Vegas instead, and now he was stepping up. I bit back my anger. Really? Because his last text to Grandpa was a lie, and your nurse quit. I hung up before she could respond, my pulse hammering. I needed facts, not excuses. Scrolling through Grandpa's contacts, I found the home nurse Samantha Taylor. I called, bracing myself. Samantha, this is Ashley Walker, Charles Thompson's granddaughter. I'm a combat medic, just got back from Iraq. I found Grandpa in bad shape. Why'd you stop coming? She sighed, heavy with regret. I'm so sorry, Ashley. I stopped 2 weeks ago. Your brother David handled payments, but he stopped sending checks 6 weeks back. I kept going unpaid for a while because I was worried about Charles, but I've got my own family to feed. Did you tell my parents or David about Grandpa's condition? I pressed. I called David repeatedly, she said. Left voicemails about Charles needing his meds, needing check-ins. He said it was under control, that he'd hired another service. I asked for their contact to pass on my notes, but he brushed me off. I clenched my jaw. There was no other service, was there? Samantha paused. No. I'm so sorry. I thanked her, promising to follow up, my mind racing. David wasn't just negligent, he was orchestrating this. Back in Iraq, I'd learned to read people under pressure. You see it in their eyes, fear lies, or resolve. David's lies were piling up, just like when he'd sweet-talked me into that loan, promising repayment while booking flights to Vegas. I'd trusted him then, but not now. I pulled up Grandpa's phone again, digging deeper. Another text from him to David a week before the Hawaii trip, hard to get upstairs. Please come by. David's reply. Busy, Grandpa. I'll send someone. He hadn't. The betrayal wasn't just careless, it was calculated. I leaned back in the stiff hospital chair, the hum of monitors filling the silence. The doctor, Nathan Cole, stepped out. Family of Charles Thompson. I stood, my duffel still at my feet. I'm his granddaughter, Ashley Walker. He nodded, his face serious. He's stable, but critical. Severe dehydration, pneumonia, setting and missed medications for at least 2 weeks. He's lucky you got here. I swallowed hard. Can I see him? He led me to the ICU, where Grandpa lay under white sheets, tubes snaking from his arms. His eyes were clearer, now meeting mine. Ashley, he whispered, voice weak but warm. You came all this way. I took his hand, careful not to jostle the IV. Of course I did. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? He looked away, ashamed. Your parents said you were too busy saving lives. David promised he'd handle everything. My stomach twisted. David again. When did you last see them? I asked. A month ago, he said. Dropped off groceries, said they were swamped with work. Then the nurse stopped coming. He closed his eyes, exhausted. I tried to manage. I stepped outside to clear my head, the hospital's sterile smell sharp in my nose. My parents and David hadn't just neglected Grandpa, they'd lied to him, to the nurse, to me. Those Facebook posts flashed in my mind, David's wife laughing, my parents toasting by the beach, all while Grandpa starved. But something didn't add up. Grandpa had savings, a pension, more than enough to cover a nurse bill's care. Where was the money going? I gripped my phone, a plan forming. I'd start at Grandpa's house, dig through every drawer, every file. If David was behind this, I'd find proof. And when I did, he'd regret ever crossing me. Back at Grandpa's house that night, the silence felt heavier than any war zone. The hospital had stabilized him, but I couldn't sit still. I needed answers. The kitchen counter was buried under unopened bills, electric, water, property tax, all stamped past due. I rifled through drawers, finding bank statements that made my blood run cold. Regular withdrawals, thousands at a time, drained from Grandpa's savings over the past year. One name kept popping up as cosigner: David. My brother, who'd scammed me out of $3,000 for his fake startup, was bleeding Grandpa dry. I moved to the basement where Grandpa kept his old desk. Dust coated everything, but a stack of credit card statements caught my eye. Charges for restaurants, boutiques, a travel agency, places Grandpa would never visit. One receipt showed a $5,000 payment for a Hawaii resort signed by David. Another listed an auction sale for Grandpa's antique watch collection worth $10,000 with David's signature. My hands shook as I pieced it together. This wasn't neglect. It was theft, systematic, deliberate, and led by my brother with my parents' blessing. Then I remembered something Grandpa had shown me years ago before I deployed. He'd led me to this basement, pointing to a small painting of the Rockies on the wall. "Ashley, if anything ever happens to me, check behind this," he'd said, his voice serious. I slid the painting aside, revealing a wall safe. My birthday, 0315199997, unlocked it with a click. Inside were folders, a USB drive labeled "For Ashley," and a note in Grandpa's neat handwriting: "Watch first." My throat tightened. Even now he was protecting me. I plugged the USB into his old laptop, the screen flickering to life. Grandpa's face appeared, gray hair, combed eyes, sharp but heavy with worry. "Ashley," he began, "if you're seeing this, something's gone wrong. I've always feared your parents and David might prioritize themselves over family. Your mother and father have leaned on my savings too long, but David, he's the one I worry about most. He borrowed from me years ago, never repaid, always had excuses." I saw calculation in his eyes when we discussed my health last year. He leaned closer, voice firm. "I set up a trust for my care with your parents and David as executors, but with strict rules. If they neglect me or misuse funds, my lawyer Matthew Lewis has instructions to transfer control to you. You're the only one I trust, Ashley, with your honor and duty from the Army. The documents are in this safe, including a contingency clause to remove them as executors and make you my power of attorney." He paused, softening. "I'm proud of you, granddaughter. Protect yourself and our family's legacy." The video ended, and I sat, frozen, tears burning my eyes. Grandpa had seen through David's lies, my parents' selfishness, and prepared for this. I opened the folders, his will, trust details, and Matthew Lewis's business card with a note. "Call any time." It was 10 p.m., too late to call, but I'd be at his office first thing tomorrow. The evidence was damning: David's signatures, the drained accounts, the sold antiques. They'd gambled with Grandpa's life, and I'd make sure they lost everything. I barely slept, my mind replaying Grandpa's video, David's fake promises, my parents' beach photos. In Iraq, I'd faced split-second decisions, tourniquets under fire, dragging teammates to safety. This was different, but just as urgent. I remembered a mission where I'd stabilized Lieutenant Kevin Miller, blood pouring from his arm, while Specialist Megan Garcia covered us. "You've got steady hands, Walker," she'd said. Those hands were steady now, sorting documents, preparing for battle. My parents and David thought they could outsmart everyone, but they didn't know me anymore. By morning, I was at Matthew Lewis's office in downtown Denver, folders and USB in my bag. The receptionist ushered me in, saying, "Mr. Lewis has been expecting a call from your family for years." Matthew, a gray-haired man in his 60s, stood to shake my hand. "Ashley Walker, your grandfather spoke highly of you, your service, your strength." I laid out everything: Grandpa's critical condition, the unpaid bills David's forged, signatures, the auctioned antiques, the Hawaii trip while he starved. I played the video, Matthew's face hardening with each word. "This is clear elder neglect and financial exploitation. he said, tapping the contingency clause. Your grandfather's will is airtight. We can file an emergency petition today to grant you temporary guardianship and freeze all accounts your parents and David have accessed. I nodded, my resolve solid. How fast can we move? Matthew's eyes narrowed. I'll call Judge Victoria Lane directly. She's handled cases like this before. With Grandpa's condition and this evidence, we'll get a hearing by afternoon. As we prepared the paperwork, my phone buzzed another call from David. I let it go to voicemail, his voice smug through the speaker. Ashley, you're overreacting. Let's talk this out like family. Family. He'd sold Grandpa's legacy for a beach vacation. I deleted the message, my anger sharpening into a plan. The court would be just the start. I'd expose every lie, every dollar they stole, and make sure they faced consequences not just in court, but in every way that hurt. By noon, Matthew, Lewis, and I sat in Judge Victoria Lane's chambers, the air thick with tension. The emergency petition was on her desk, Grandpa's medical reports, bank statements showing drained accounts, David's forged signatures, and the auction receipt for his antiques. Matthew presented the case with precision: elder neglect, financial exploitation, and Grandpa's video laying out the contingency clause. I sat straight, my army training keeping me calm, but inside fury simmered. Judge Lane, a sharp woman in her 60s, scanned the documents, her expression unreadable. This is egregious, she finally said. Temporary guardianship is granted to Ashley Walker, effective immediately. All accounts are frozen, and a restraining order will bar your parents and brother from accessing Charles Thompson's assets. I exhaled relief, mixing with resolve. Matthew squeezed my shoulder as we left the courthouse. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. But brace yourself, they'll fight back. He was right. My phone buzzed relentlessly, David's number, then my parents' calls piling up. I ignored them, heading back to the hospital to check on Grandpa. His condition was improving, but he looked fragile under the ICU monitors. I held his hand, promising, I've got you now. They can't hurt you anymore. His weak smile fueled my determination. Hours later, my parents and David stormed into the ICU, their resort tans jarring against the sterile room. My mother, clutching a designer purse, spoke first, voice loud enough to spike Grandpa's heart rate on the monitor. Ashley, what is this nonsense? Legal papers at the airport? You're freezing our accounts. My father stepped forward, face red. You've lost it, staging some military coup against your own family. David, in a crisp polo, smirked. Grandpa wanted us to live well, Ashley. You're blowing this out of proportion. I stood, positioning myself between them and Grandpa's bed, my voice low but commanding. Keep it down, this is an ICU. I found Grandpa starving alone while you were sipping wine in Hawaii. David, you forged his signatures, sold his antiques, drained his pension. You call that living well? David's smirk faltered, but he doubled down. You don't get it. You ran off to war, left us to handle everything. I stepped up. My mother nodded. David's been here, Ashley, unlike you. Their words stung, dragging me back to that $3,000 loan. David never repaid his lies about a startup while he partied in Vegas. I leaned in, voice steady. Stepped up. You stopped paying the nurse Samantha 6 weeks ago. You ignored Grandpa's texts begging for help. I've got the bank statements, the auction receipts, your name's on everything, David. My father scoffed. You're paranoid, Ashley. That war messed you up. I held up Grandpa's phone, showing their ignored texts. This isn't paranoia. It's evidence. A nurse signaled for security as Grandpa's monitors beeped faster. My mother's eyes darted, her tone shifting to fake concern. We're his family, Ashley. You can't keep us from him. I didn't blink. The restraining order says I can. You'll get your chance in court in 30 days. Until then, stay away. David stepped closer, voice low. You're making a mistake, Ashley. We'll fight this. I met his gaze, my combat instincts kicking in. Try me. Now leave, or security will. A guard appeared, and they left, my mother's dramatic huff echoing down the hall. I turned to Grandpa, his eyes wide but proud. "You sounded like me in my prime," he whispered. I squeezed his hand, guilt and anger warring inside me. They'd nearly killed him, and now they were playing victims. Back at Grandpa's house that evening, I dug deeper, finding more evidence: a mortgage application with David's forged signature, attempting to refinance Grandpa's paid-off home. The bank had flagged it, but the attempt alone was damning. Matthew called, confirming the investigation was moving fast. "We've got records of $150,000 diverted over the past year," he said. "David's signatures are everywhere with your parents' approval." I sat in Grandpa's basement, surrounded by his old photos and books, my resolve hardening. In Iraq, I'd learned to act decisively, stabilizing wounds under fire, making calls that saved lives. This was no different. David thought he could gaslight me, but the evidence was ironclad. My parents thought they could guilt me, but I was done with their lies. Matthew's next words sealed it. "The judge wants a full accounting. We're pushing for permanent removal of their executor status. You ready for the next step?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "More than ready." My phone lit up again, another voicemail from David, his tone desperate now. "Ashley, let's work this out. You don't want to tear the family apart. Tear the family apart. They'd done that when they left Grandpa to die." I deleted the message, my plan clear. Court was just the beginning. I'd expose their lies to everyone, friends, neighbors online, and make sure they faced every consequence. David's smug face in those Hawaii photos flashed in my mind. He'd regret underestimating me. The days after the hospital confrontation were a storm of action. Matthew Lewis moved like lightning, filing for a permanent removal of my parents and David as executors of Grandpa's will. The evidence was airtight: $150,000 siphoned from Grandpa's accounts, forged mortgage applications, and his antique watch collection sold off for David's luxury vacations. I wasn't just fighting for Grandpa anymore. I was dismantling their lies. My phone kept buzzing, voicemails piling up from my mother pleading, "Ashley, we're family. Don't do this." And David, his tone shifting from smug to panicked. "You're ruining us." I deleted each one, my resolve like steel forged in Iraq's chaos. I took it further. Using my military network, I reached out to a contact in the Denver DA's office, a former Army buddy who specialized in financial crimes. I sent him the bank statements, auction receipts, and Grandpa's video pushing for a criminal investigation into David for embezzlement. "This is solid," he said. "We'll open a case." Meanwhile, I drafted a public post on my own Facebook, uploading side-by-side images: Grandpa frail in his hospital bed, tubes in his arms next to my parents, and David toasting wine glasses in Hawaii. The caption was simple: "While my grandfather starved, they partied." This is what elder neglect looks like. I hit post and it spread fast. Neighbors, friends, even David's coworkers shared it. Their comments scathing. The fallout was swift. My parents and David tried damage control, posting vague apologies about misunderstandings. But the truth was out. David's employer, a local real estate firm, suspended him after clients questioned his ethics. My mother's book club dropped her, and my father's golf buddies stopped calling. Their social circle, built on appearances, crumbled under the weight of public shame. I didn't stop there. Matthew uncovered more. David had used Grandpa's credit card for a new car lease, a sleek convertible parked at his house. I pushed the DA to seize it as evidence, forcing David to liquidate assets to cover restitution. The car was gone within a week, sold to pay back a fraction of what he'd stolen. In court 30 days after the emergency hearing, Judge Victoria Lane didn't hold back. "The evidence of elder neglect and financial exploitation is overwhelming," she declared, her voice cutting through the room. My parents and David sat across from me, their faces a mix of defiance and desperation. Matthew presented the full accounting: $150,000 diverted, forged signatures on a mortgage attempt, and antiques sold without consent. The contingency clause in Grandpa's will was invoked, permanently removing them as executors. I was named sole heir and power of attorney with court oversight to manage Grandpa's assets. A disinheritance clause sealed their fate. They'd forfeited any claim to his estate through their actions. David's attorney tried to argue, claiming he'd acted in Grandpa's best interests. I stood my voice steady. Best interests? He forged signatures, sold Grandpa's heirlooms, and left him to die while vacationing in Hawaii. I have the receipts. The judge's gavel fell, finalizing my guardianship. As we left, my mother grabbed my arm, tears streaming. Ashley, how could you do this to us? I pulled away. You did this to yourselves when you chose wine glasses over Grandpa. David glared, muttering, "This isn't over." I looked him dead in the eyes. "It is for me." Their desperation escalated. They tried breaking into Grandpa's house one night, tripping the security system I'd installed. Police caught them rummaging through his desk, searching for documents to contest the will. The incident strengthened the restraining order, barring them from the property permanently. My parents flooded my phone with texts cycling from "anger you ungrateful child" to begging, "We'll lose everything." I blocked their numbers along with David's, and every relative they roped in to plead their case. Their words meant nothing. Family wasn't blood. It was action, and they'd shown none. 6 months later, Grandpa sat across from me on his porch in a new home closer to my base just outside Denver. His recovery wasn't perfect. Pneumonia had left scars, and he needed a walker, but his eyes were bright again, watching sparrows at the feeder I'd set up. "You didn't have to do all this, Ashley," he said, his voice stronger now. I poured him tea, smiling. "You'd have done the same for me." I'd requested a stateside transfer, landing a position at a military hospital 30 minutes away. It let me serve while checking on him daily, rebuilding the care system my family had dismantled. The legal battle didn't end with the will. The DA pressed charges against David for embezzlement and elder abuse, citing the forged documents and diverted funds. My parents faced lesser charges for complicity, their names tied to the mortgage fraud. David's assets, his car savings, even part of his house, were liquidated to pay restitution totaling $80,000 so far. The public exposure had cost them more than money. David lost his job permanently. My parents moved to a smaller apartment, their social status in tatters. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street to avoid them. I didn't feel joy watching them fall, just clarity. In Iraq, I'd learned to make hard calls under pressure, like when I stabilized a soldier while bullets flew, knowing one wrong move could cost a life. Here, the stakes were different, but just as real. Cutting them off wasn't revenge, it was justice, protecting Grandpa from their greed. I looked at him now, sipping tea, and knew I'd made the right choice. This taught me family is about actions, not blood. I had to cut toxic ties to save Grandpa, spotting betrayal early, whether it was David's lies about a startup or their ignored texts while he suffered. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Everyone check on your elders regularly. Look for signs of neglect or theft, unpaid bills, ignored calls, sudden spending. It can happen in any family, and ignoring it only enables the selfish. Don't wait until it's too late, like I almost did. Thanks for listening to my story. It's been a tough road, but sharing it feels right. Comment below with your own tough family choices. What would you have done? Hit like, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share if this hit home. Your support means the world.
Down the stairs, let it slam against every step, then tossed it onto the driveway like it was full of garbage. I didn't say anything. My voice had already been stripped down to silence over the years. My mother stood at the doorway, arms crossed like a statue sculpted out of resentment. He pointed his finger in my face, so close I could smell the bitterness in his breath. "In a month, you'll be back on your knees." "Parasite." I cried. Of course I did. Not because I believed him, but because I knew he believed every word. I picked up my suitcase, a cheap one with a broken zipper and a single change of clothes inside, and walked away. No hug, no goodbye, just the sound of the screen door slamming behind me. I didn't look back, because if I had, I might have broken. And I couldn't afford to. No job, no apartment, just a prepaid phone with 3% battery and no charger. I slept on a bench that night, ate a stale bagel the next morning, and spent the rest of the week chasing any kind of work that would take a kid with no address and no references. But I made it through that first month, and the one after, and every one that followed. I survived. I endured. And slowly I built. It's been 9 years since that night. And the girl with the torn suitcase? She doesn't exist anymore. Today, I live in a home I bought in full. I run my own business. My name is featured in magazines and startup lists. I mentor women who were told they'd never become anything. And for the last 9 years, I never heard from them. Not a single text. Not even when I graduated college. Not when I was featured in business weeklies, Next Power Builders. Not even when I bought the house that sits just 5 miles from theirs. I became invisible until now. Because last Tuesday, my phone started buzzing. Unknown numbers. Back-to-back voicemails. Some from my hometown area code. One from a number I knew by heart, even though I had deleted it long ago. I listened to one message. Camille, it's your mother. Please.
We need to talk.
We wouldn't be reaching out if it wasn't serious. Please call. I didn't respond. So they tried again. It's urgent. It's about the house. And then, we were sorry. Sorry? After nearly a decade? After leaving your own daughter on the street with nothing but a broken suitcase and a slur echoing in her ears? I stared at my screen, watched the calls come in again, and I smiled. My name is Camille, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because the people who left me in the dirt at 17, they just came crawling back. And this time, I'm the one holding the door. If you had looked at our house from the outside, you'd never guess what it felt like to live inside it. White picket fence. Perfect lawn. A mailbox with gold lettering. People at church used to say things like, "You're so lucky, Camille. Your parents seem so put together." But inside, it was a war zone wrapped in good manners. My father ruled like a general. Every word, every decision, every silence his. My mother floated behind him like a ghost in pearls, smiling when people watched, but cold as marble when the doors shut. They didn't hit me.
No.
Their weapons were quieter, sharper. They punished me with silence, with disapproval, with withholding love unless I conformed. Straighten your back. Why do you always have to talk so much? Don't be dramatic. Stop drawing, it's a waste of time. Be more like your cousin Jenna. At least she knows how to follow rules. I was a straight-A student, but it was never enough. I remember once coming home with a 98 on a calculus test. Dad glanced at the paper, handed it back without looking at me, and said, "Should have been 100. I stopped showing him my grades after that. I wasn't allowed to decorate my room. No posters. No color. Even birthdays felt transactional. Gifts chosen without thought, like they were checking boxes on a list of things parents were supposed to do. But the control didn't stop at the door. When I was 14, I applied for a local art program. I'd been sketching since I could hold a pencil. It was the only time I felt like I existed. When they found the acceptance letter in my bag, they ripped it up in front of me. "We're not paying for you to chase nonsense. You'll embarrass us." I was grounded for trying. That was love in our house, conditional. Earned through obedience. Granted only when you were useful. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped dreaming out loud. I just focused on surviving. I got a job at a diner after school and told them it was for character building when really it was so I could stash money in a secret envelope behind my dresser. I told myself, one day I'll leave, and I won't look back. But when that day came, when I stood at the edge of the driveway with that busted suitcase and bruised heart, it still broke me. Because no matter how bad it was, a part of me always hoped they'd love me enough to change. They didn't. They called me a parasite. They said I'd be on my knees in a month. And when I left, they didn't check. Didn't call. Didn't wonder if I was alive. To them, cutting me off wasn't cruelty. It was teaching me a lesson. But here's the twist. I learned it. Just not the one they hoped for. They taught me that silence can be armor. That rejection can be a map. That sometimes the only way to survive is to stop begging for love from people who only speak the language of power. So, I became fluent in my own. And now, years later, they want a conversation?
No.
They're not ready for the woman they forged in their fire. The first night on the street feels like drowning with your eyes wide open. I had $37 in my pocket and a suitcase that barely closed. My only pair of decent shoes were the ones on my feet, and my only real plan was, don't die. I spent that night in the corner of a 24-hour bus station. I used my hoodie as a pillow. I wrapped my arms around my suitcase like it was a shield. I didn't sleep, not really. Just waited for morning. Waited for something that felt less terrifying than silence. The second night, I met a girl named Danny who worked at a diner. She told me they were short-staffed, and I could try washing dishes. I did. That turned into my first paycheck. The first month passed in a blur of steam burns, stale toast, borrowed jackets, and quarters stacked carefully for cheap coffee and laundry. Every single day, I expected to crack. Every single day, I thought, they were right. I can't do this. But I didn't go back. Not once. Because I knew what waited there wasn't home. It was control. It was shame wrapped in fake forgiveness. It was more of that cold, bitter love they used to keep me small. So I stayed out in the storm and learned to build shelter from scratch. I rented a room from an older woman named Mrs. Lyle. She charged me $100 a month and made soup on Sundays. She didn't ask questions. Didn't judge. Just told me, survival's not pretty, baby, but it's beautiful when you do it. By month 3, I had 2 jobs. By month 6, I had enrolled in night classes using a small community grant. By year 2, I earned a scholarship. I didn't tell anyone. Not a soul. Especially not them. I imagined my mother sipping coffee at the kitchen table, wondering if I was still alive. I imagined my father shaking his head, muttering, "She'll call any day now. Just wait." But the call never came, because each time I wanted to pick up the phone, each time I stood in front of that payphone, quarters in hand, I heard it again. "You'll be back on your knees, parasite." And every time I made the same decision.
No.
I'll crawl on glass before I crawl back to you. That's what they didn't understand. They thought they broke me by kicking me out. But all they really did was free me. Because once I had nothing, no safety net, no expectations, no hands holding me down, I could finally see what I was capable of. And it wasn't just survival. It was rebirth. Over the next few years, I built my future like it was an act of revenge. Late night studying. Freelance gigs that turned into steady income. Tutoring kids in math for cash under the table. Eventually, I built a consulting business, slowly then suddenly. By 24, I had contracts, savings, and a studio apartment filled with things I earned. Not a single dime from them. Not a single apology from them. And now, 9 years later, with everything I have, they want a seat at my table? Funny. They didn't think I'd last a month. But I've outlived their predictions by nearly a decade. And now, I'm the one deciding who eats. The first message was short. "Camille, it's your mom. Please call." I stared at it for a while. It had come from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew that tone. That trembling, guilt-laced hush. Like she was rehearsing forgiveness through her teeth. I didn't reply. 2 hours later, another text came in. "We really need to talk. It's serious. Please don't ignore this." Still no mention of what they'd done. "No. We're sorry for throwing you away. No. We regret calling you a parasite." Just urgency, the kind of panic people feel when their safety net is gone, and they realize the one they cut loose was the only thing strong enough to catch them. Then came the voicemail from my dad. His voice sounded rough. Tired. Worn down in a way I'd never heard growing up. "Camille, I know we didn't end on good terms. But this isn't about the past. We just need a little help. Some things happened with the business. We're behind on the house, taxes." Then a long pause. "We wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious. Just call me back." I didn't cry. I should've, maybe. But all I felt was this slow, cold wave of realization. They didn't call because they missed me. They called because they needed me. And suddenly, I understood the silence of the last 9 years. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was disinterest. I was useless to them until now. So I started digging. I opened a private browser and searched my father's business. And there it was. Bankruptcy filing. IRS lien. 3 lawsuits. A foreclosure notice posted publicly 3 weeks ago. It was all crumbling. The house they kept pristine? On auction listing sites. The business they prioritized over me?
Dead.
And I had just signed a 6-figure deal with an international client. My team was expanding. I had employees, interns, an office with my name on the wall. 9 years ago, they bet I'd be nothing. Now they were betting on me to save them. I sat with that thought. I let it marinate in silence. Because this wasn't a movie. There was no epic reunion speech. No tearful embrace at a train station. This was real life. And in real life, when people show you what you mean to them, believe them. I thought about replying. Thought about saying,
Sure.
I'll help. Let's meet at that same driveway you threw me down.
But no.
They didn't deserve poetic. They deserved truth.
I took my time.
Let them sweat through a weekend of radio silence. And then I sent one line, no greeting. No emoji. No punctuation. You said I'd be back on my knees. Turns out I was just getting on my feet. They didn't reply. And that silence? For once, it was mine. I agreed to meet them. Not because I owe them anything. Not because I had questions. But because I wanted to look them in the eye. And not feel small. I picked the place, a quiet cafe in the nicer part of town. The kind of place they wouldn't have expected me to belong in. The kind of place they used to tell me I'd never afford if I kept chasing dreams like a fool. I wore a tailored blazer. Neutral tones. Clean lines.
Power.
My hair was pulled back. No loud colors, no revenge makeup. Just peace. And presence. They were already there when I arrived. 2 people who once looked like giants in my life, now sunken, aged by time and consequence. My mother wore oversized sunglasses like they could hide how much she'd been crying. My father looked thinner, grayer, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. They stood when I walked in. My father tried to smile. Camille. Wow, you look. I held up a hand and sat down. Silence followed. The server came and took my order. A matcha latte, oat milk, no sugar. The same drink they used to mock me for when I couldn't afford it. When we were alone again, I leaned back in my chair and said, "Let's not waste time. What do you want?" My mother blinked. "Sweetheart."
Don't, I said calmly.
"Don't start with sweetheart. Just speak." My dad cleared his throat. "We lost the business. It wasn't sudden. It's been declining for years. COVID hit us hard. Then some bad investments. We fell behind on taxes, and now the house is going up for auction." He didn't look at me, just stared at his hands. Mom added quickly, "We didn't come here to beg. We just hoped maybe you could help. With a loan. A temporary bridge. We know you're doing well." I sipped my latte and said nothing. After a long pause, I asked, "Do you remember what you said to me when you threw me out?" They froze. "You said I'd be back on my knees in a month. That I was a parasite." My father looked down. My mother whispered, "We were scared. We thought you were making a mistake. We didn't know how to help you, and we handled it badly." "No," I said. "You handled it exactly how you wanted to. You tried to break me." She shook her head, eyes watering. "We made a mistake. You made a choice." They both went quiet again. I leaned forward. "You made me believe I was nothing. And that belief nearly killed me. But it also made me relentless." My voice didn't crack. Not once. "And now you're here, asking for help. Not because you care, but because I have something you want." I stood up, left a 20 on the table. "You don't get to meet this version of me. You don't get access to her. She's not for you." My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I was already walking out. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized something powerful. They didn't just lose their house. They lost their chance to know the woman they tried to bury. I didn't look back when I left the cafe. Not at the table. Not at them. Not at the years they wasted pretending I was disposable. I walked to my car, a sleek electric coupe I bought cash 2 months ago, and slid into the driver's seat with the kind of quiet confidence you can't fake. They thought I'd come crawling back. But I didn't crawl. I climbed. Step by painful step. The consulting business I started in a cramped studio apartment was now housed in a 2-story corner office with a skyline view. I had 15 employees, 2 assistants, 4 clients on a wait list, a growing investment portfolio, an apartment in Lisbon I used for creative retreats, and a life that was finally fully mine. No more begging. No more explaining. No more apologizing for shining too brightly in a house that kept its windows closed. While they were gossiping at church, I was networking at conferences. While they were controlling every inch of their crumbling empire, I was building something with open doors and honest work. And the best part? I made sure no other girl had to start the way I did. I launched a mentorship program for young women aging out of foster care. I funded college application scholarships. I held financial literacy workshops in the exact neighborhood they told me to stay away from because it was beneath us. Turns out that neighborhood raised me more than they ever did. One afternoon, my assistant burst into my office. "Camille, check this out." She handed me her iPad. On it, a video clip. Local news. My old family home in the background. Foreclosure auction signs in the yard. My father stood on the porch, shouting at a cameraman to leave the property. My mother? Off-screen, her voice trembling as she said, "This is private. We don't want to talk about our daughter. She has nothing to do with this." But everyone knew. They'd Googled me. They saw my name in headlines. They knew exactly what they threw away. The internet doesn't forget. The comments were brutal. "You kicked her out and now you're broke? Karma's wild. I'd ask her to buy the house and turn it into a shelter. Bet she has more class than all of y'all put together." I didn't share the clip. I didn't need to, because the real revenge was that they had to watch me live, loudly, joyfully, unapologetically, in a world that welcomed me after they slammed the door in my face. I didn't pay their bills, but I did buy something else. 3 weeks later, I closed on a multi-unit property in that same neighborhood, just 5 miles from the house they lost. It wasn't flashy, just a solid building, good bones, good community. I converted the top floor into free housing for displaced women. The unit below it? An art studio, open to any young girl who wanted to sketch the kind of future she was once told she couldn't have. I didn't put my name on the building. I didn't do press. I didn't need credit. I just needed to give someone else the thing I never had. A soft landing. It happened on a Monday. I was in my office, reviewing design drafts for the shelter expansion, when reception buzzed me. "Camille, there's a woman down here. Says she's your mother." My heart didn't skip. It didn't crack. It just went still. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and looked down. There she was. Same stiff posture. Same beige trench coat she wore when she dropped me off at church socials. Same eyes, but now swollen, tired, lost. She looked like someone who had finally run out of people to lie to. I stayed at the window. "Tell her I'm in a meeting," I said into the intercom. "But she says it's urgent." "She said that 9 years ago too," I replied. Didn't mean much then either. I turned away. Let the blinds fall. 10 minutes later, my assistant walked into my office, looking uncomfortable. "She's still downstairs," she said gently. "Won't leave." Of course she wouldn't. I gave it 5 more minutes. Then I wrote a note, placed it in an envelope, and handed it to my assistant. "Please give her this." She returned 20 minutes later. She cried when she read it, then left. Quietly. I didn't ask what she looked like. I already knew, because the note said everything I needed it to. To my mother. 9 years ago, you told me I'd be back on my knees. Instead, I got on my feet. You didn't check if I survived. You didn't call.
You didn't love me. You left me.
And now you want to return, not for me, but for shelter. But you don't get to step into the house I built when you left me out in the cold. This version of me?
She's not for you.
Return to sender. Camille. I didn't expect her to understand. Because people like her, they think love is just another transaction. something you can cash in when things go south. But love isn't debt, and I didn't know her healing. Later that night, I stood in the garden behind my building, barefoot in the dirt, watching the wind dance between the wildflowers I'd planted. One of the girls from the shelter came out, shy, maybe 17, the same age I was when I got thrown away. She held a sketchbook in her hand. "Miss Camille," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." She hesitated. "Were you ever where I am now?" I smiled. "I was. Once." "And what happened?" I looked at her, young, bruised by life, but still standing. And I said, "I stopped knocking on the doors that wouldn't open. Then I built my own house. And I filled it with people who never asked me to shrink." She blinked, then smiled back. She didn't need more. Because some stories don't need to be told in full. Just understood. Sometimes I still dream about that suitcase. The one they threw down the stairs. The one with the broken zipper and nothing but clothes that didn't fit, and a heart that hadn't hardened yet. In the dream, I'm holding it again. But this time, I don't feel fear. I feel gratitude. Because that suitcase didn't carry my ruin, it carried my beginning. It's been almost 10 years since they threw me out with that final insult echoing behind me. "You'll be back on your knees, parasite." And they were right about one thing. I was on my knees. But not in front of them. I was on my knees in the back room of a diner scrubbing burnt cheese off trays. On my knees praying I could stretch $20 across 7 days. On my knees searching library computers for scholarships, jobs, hope. They thought that meant they had won. But what they didn't understand was this. Sometimes the ground is where you plant. And I planted everything. I planted pain. And it became purpose. I planted silence.
And it became strength.
I planted rejection. And it became resilience. Today, I walk through the halls of the shelter I funded, the one that houses girls who are called too much, too loud, too weak, or too broken. There's a wall in the entryway. On it, painted in soft gold letters, is a quote from one of my journals. What they threw away grew wild and beautiful where they couldn't reach. People always ask me why I don't use my last name anymore. It's simple. That name never protected me. It erased me. So I gave it back. And took only what I earned. My future. My identity. My peace. A few weeks ago, I passed by my parents' old house. It was boarded up. Grass overgrown. Paint peeling. Empty. The kingdom they sacrificed their daughter to protect was nothing but hollow wood now. I didn't stop. Didn't cry. Didn't even blink. I just whispered thank you to the version of me who survived long enough to become someone they couldn't predict. And as I walked away, I remembered something I'd once written down on a napkin during my lowest point. They called me a parasite. But parasites only feed. I bled, broke, built, and bloomed. In the final scene of this life, the real life, not the one they imagined, I'm not on my knees. I'm at the front of a room full of girls, teaching them how to sign their first lease. I'm standing in front of crowds at conferences, telling the truth. That healing doesn't always come with apologies. That sometimes the closure is you deciding the story ends on your terms. And most of all, that the family you're born into may bury you. But you're not a corpse. You're a seed. They threw me out thinking I'd wither. But I became the storm that watered my own roots. And now, everything I grow grows beyond them. Foil paper. Tied with a red ribbon. Beautiful from the outside, like everything in this family. But when I pulled the lid off, nothing. No letter. No gift. Just air. I looked up from the table slowly. My mother smirked, her eyes flicking toward my niece, who was currently unwrapping her third gift, a personalized iPad case with her name stitched into it. "Your daughter doesn't need a party," my mother had said earlier that week when I offered to host a small celebration. "She's not the type to care about attention," she added, dismissively. Then she turned around and bought a 4-tier cake for my sister's child. Even after all these years, they still believed love had a hierarchy, and I was always last. I said nothing as I closed the empty box. My daughter, Ava, sitting quietly beside me, gave my hand a small squeeze. She didn't understand what just happened. Not fully. But I could see it in her eyes, the question. Why us? My father, ever the master of timing, raised his glass and chuckled. Well, you never really sacrifice yourself for others anyway, Nina. The laughter that followed was light, effortless, as if what just happened wasn't cruel, as if the entire moment wasn't laced with humiliation. That was the thing about my family. They always knew how to dress cruelty up as tradition. I smiled politely, stayed seated, ate my slice of dry, overly sweet cake, watched my niece dance with her new headphones while Ava played with the same coloring book she brought from home. And in that moment, I didn't explode. I didn't cry. I didn't fight for my place at the table. I just decided. That night, after I tucked Ava into bed, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and started untying all the threads I had used to keep this family comfortable. I canceled the vacation we were supposed to take next month, the one I paid for in full, even though I was only invited as a backup babysitter. I logged into the joint account I shared with my parents, the one I'd filled steadily for years with contributions for emergencies, groceries, birthday parties that somehow never included me. I transferred every cent out. Then I closed it. Next, I reviewed the paperwork for the car, the one I bought under my name, which they drove around like it was theirs. Insurance, payments, registration. All me. I put it up for sale the next morning. Within 72 hours, I had done what they never expected. I left them the same way they had always left me. Silently, but completely. Because when someone hands you an empty box, they're not giving you a joke. They're giving you permission to walk away. My name is Nina, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me, because the day they laughed over an empty gift box, they had no idea what I'd take away next. My name has never been Nina, the favorite. It's never even been Nina, the respected. In my family, I've always been Nina, the provider. Nina, the afterthought. Nina, the one who pays. Growing up, I watched my sister get everything handed to her, birthday parties with ponies, designer clothes before she could spell Gucci, our parents beaming like she'd hung the stars.
Me?
I got sensible shoes, a savings bond, and silence. They never said they loved me less. They didn't have to. Love lived in action, and all theirs went in one direction. When my sister dropped out of college, my parents said, she just needs a break. When I got a scholarship, they said, good. One less bill to worry about. When she had her baby at 21, the whole family rallied around her like she was royalty. I bought her diapers, paid her rent, covered her car note for a year. All without being asked. They didn't thank me. They expected it. Because I had a good job. Because I was responsible. Because I didn't need as much. But that's the thing about being the responsible one. They start treating you like a resource, not a person. The first time I paid off my mother's maxed-out credit card, she told people it was handled. When I bought her new eyeglasses, she said my sister picked the frames. When I took Ava, my own daughter, on her first vacation, I had to lie and say it was a work trip. Because otherwise, they would have guilted me into taking the whole family. And I would have. Because I wanted their approval so badly, I kept giving. And giving. Until I was broke in ways no one could see. They never knew how often I skipped dinners to make those car payments. They never asked what I wanted for my birthday. They never noticed that the only reason Ava had a proper backpack was because I stopped buying new clothes for myself. But I never complained, because I thought being quiet about it made me strong. It didn't. It made me invisible. And the worst part? I let them. Until the night of the empty box. Until I watched my parents beam while my niece unwrapped electronics and gift cards and custom jewelry, all while Ava clapped politely beside her with nothing in her lap. Until my father laughed and called me selfish, as I sat there with an unpaid trip in his name, a car in his driveway with my money behind it, and a child who only ever got secondhand attention from the people who claimed to love us both. That's when something in me snapped. Not loud, not angry. Just quiet and final. I realized I wasn't the backbone of this family. I was the doormat. And the moment you realize that, you stop opening the door. So yes, I locked the accounts. Yes, I canceled the trip. Yes, I sold the car. But no, I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it out of self-respect. Because the girl they forgot? She remembered herself. I've swallowed 1,000 little betrayals in my life. I've smiled through dismissive comments, forgave slights disguised as jokes, and nodded politely while my parents turned every milestone of mine into a footnote in someone else's story. But that box? That empty, beautiful, intentional box? It was the last time I would make myself smaller to keep their egos full. Let me explain how we got there. Ava was turning 7. I'd saved for months. Not for anything extravagant. Just a small gathering with a cake, some paper crowns, and the joy she deserved. I told my mom I wanted to host it at her house. Just family. Just love. She frowned and said, "Your daughter doesn't need a party. She's not that kind of child."
I didn't even know what that meant.
She said it like Ava was less deserving because she wasn't loud or demanding. Because she was polite.
Soft.
Observant. Exactly, like I was. Instead, my mom proposed a joint dinner with the whole family, meaning my sister and her daughter. She promised it would be fair. Equal gifts. Equal cake. I wanted to believe her. Because I always wanted to believe her. So I canceled the party. I told Ava we'd celebrate with Grandma and Grandpa instead, that they were planning something special. She nodded. She always trusts me. That night, I watched my sister's daughter tear through gift after gift while Ava waited her turn patiently, the way I taught her. There was no second cake. No song with her name in it. Just that gold-wrapped box they handed me with a smug little smile. I had to pretend I didn't already know what was coming. And still, when I lifted the lid and saw it was empty, it punched the air out of my chest. Ava leaned closer. "Mama, did they forget something inside?" I stared into her eyes, wide, hopeful, and I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Because I knew exactly what they'd say. It was just a joke. You take things too seriously. Don't make a scene. You always ruin everything. So I smiled. I hugged Ava and said, "It's okay, baby. I already got the best gift, you." She beamed. And they all thought I meant it. That night, after I put her to bed, I sat in the living room with the empty box in my lap and stared at it like it might open itself and reveal a lesson I'd missed. But it didn't. There was no lesson left to learn. Just the truth. They had never planned to give Ava anything. They had never planned to treat her like she mattered. And they certainly hadn't changed. That box was a mirror. And I saw it clearly now. I wasn't being excluded by mistake. I was being excluded by design. Because I was the reminder of everything they didn't want to face. That I worked harder than all of them. That I gave more. That I never demanded a spotlight. Only to be seen. And still, they laughed. Still, they handed me nothing. So I stopped giving them everything. That night I made a list. Not of people to confront, but of things to take back. I didn't scream. I didn't post cryptic quotes. I didn't cut them off. I just started to disappear. The morning after the dinner, while they were still gloating over their perfect evening, I opened my laptop and began what I now call Operation Vanish. First, the trip. A family vacation had been planned for the fall, a beach house rental, 2 cars, an Airbnb stocked with groceries. I had paid for everything. The agreement, of course, was that they'd reimburse me in pieces. A lie I'd accepted for years. I went to the reservation page and hit cancel. Full refund. Straight to my private account. Then I texted the family group chat. Vacations off. Personal reasons. No one replied. Next, the bank. There was a joint emergency account I opened 3 years ago. It started as a safety net for my parents, a shared pot I quietly kept filled to cover surprise bills, medication, or unexpected expenses that always seemed to fall on me. I drained it, moved every cent to an account in Ava's name. Then I closed the original. 2 hours later, I received a text from my mother. Did something happen to the bank account? I left it on read. Third, the car. My parents drove a vehicle I bought under my name. Payments came from my account. Insurance?
Mine.
Registration?
Mine.
The only thing they contributed was gas sometimes. I called the dealership. The payoff amount was less than I expected. I sold it the same week. I never told them. The following Friday, my dad called. Straight to voicemail. Then a message. Hey, the car isn't in the driveway. Did you take it to get serviced? I blocked the number. By Sunday, I was nearly done. I had stopped babysitting my niece. Stopped answering questions in the family group chat. Stopped replying to my sister's casual, "Can you help me with?" texts. I didn't even announce my exit. Because that's the thing about people who only value you when you're useful. The second you stop giving, they start noticing. Not you, your absence. The silence. The missed favors. The drying well. But I didn't vanish from the world. I became louder in the places that mattered. Ava and I had more time. More money. More peace. We cooked together at night. Took walks without interruptions. Read books. Watched cartoons. Laughed. Really laughed, without checking phones for someone else's demand. One night, she looked up at me and said, "Mama, you look happier. Did something good happen?" I kissed her forehead and said, "Yes, baby. Something very good happened." I stopped being the background character in everyone else's story. I stopped financing the spotlight for people who never clapped for me. And most of all, I finally started choosing us. It started like clockwork. Monday morning, 9:42 a.m., a text from my sister. "Did you take the car? Mom and Dad are freaking out." I muted the conversation. Then came the emails. My father, the same man who once said I never sacrifice for others, was now requesting access to the shared account. Except it wasn't there anymore.
Gone. Closed.
Emptied without a whisper. By Wednesday, my mother sent a voice note. Dramatic, quivering, classic. "We're trying to pay the electric bill. The card isn't working. What's going on?" Then the cherry on top. A Facebook post from my sister. Just vague enough to avoid admitting fault, but specific enough to bait sympathy. It's crazy how one person's decision can leave a whole family struggling. We're all just trying our best. Prayers appreciated. The comments rolled in. "Stay strong, love. Some people are so selfish." Is this about Nina? I thought she was helping with your parents. I didn't engage.
Didn't comment. Didn't react.
I simply watched. Watched the panic unfold like a play I'd seen 100 times before. Only this time, I wasn't cast as the supporting character. This time, I was in the audience. And I wasn't clapping. By Friday, I got a text from my dad. "No more small talk. No more pride. We're not asking for much. Just help us get through the month. I don't know what's going on with you lately." I stared at the message for a long time. I thought about how many months I got through without their help. How many nights I chose between dinner and gas. How many times I smiled through exhaustion so Ava wouldn't feel it. And yet, not once, had they ever asked me how I was. I typed a reply. Simple. Final. "If I'm such a burden, I figured you'd be relieved to be free of me." Then I blocked him. Because here's the truth. People who only love you when you're useful don't know how to handle you when you're whole. And for the first time, I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't overdrawn. I wasn't financing the fantasy of a perfect family anymore. I was just free. Ava and I took a small weekend trip. Just us. A little cabin by the lake, warm cocoa, board games, and real, honest joy. No guilt. No fake gratitude. No phone buzzing every 5 minutes with someone else's emergency disguised as an urgent favor. She built a snow angel that looked like it had wings. "Mama," she asked, "do you think people get tired of giving too much?" I blinked. "Why do you ask that?" She shrugged. "You used to look tired all the time, but now you look lighter." I hugged her so tight she squeaked. She was right. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I had just put down a weight that was never mine to carry. And the people watching it slip out of their hands? They weren't confused. They were panicking. Because the woman they once drained was gone. And the silence she left behind It was louder than all their demands combined. It didn't take long for silence to turn to entitlement. By the end of the week, my mother called me from 4 different numbers. One voicemail stuck out. "You're hurting your family. You know that, right? We've always tried our best for you. Don't punish us just because your sister gets more attention." That was the line. Not "we're sorry." Not "you're right." Just "don't punish us." As if all I'd done was throw a tantrum. As if their years of erasure could be explained away by a shrug and the phrase, "we did our best." Then came the text from my sister. "Are you done sulking yet? You know you're making this harder than it needs to be. Everyone's suffering because you're acting brand new." Acting brand new. That was her favorite line. She used it years ago when I bought my first car without asking Dad to co-sign. She used it again when I got my promotion and moved into a nicer apartment. And now, she was using it because I stopped being their wallet. So this time I answered. Not with a rant. Not with rage. But with precision. I waited until morning. Let them all stew overnight. Then I opened the family group chat, the same one they only used when they needed things, and typed. If I'm the selfish one, why was I the only one paying for everything? If I'm the problem, why didn't you notice until the money stopped? If I was never the favorite, why did you assume I'd always take care of you? Then I added, the favorite daughter is in a bank. Ask her to cover the bills. Ask her to return the car. Ask her to plan the next trip. I'm done. I muted the group after that. Didn't wait for replies.
Didn't care what they said.
Because it wasn't about them anymore. It was about Ava watching me reclaim my voice. It was about finally showing her that boundaries aren't mean, they're necessary. And I'll admit, it felt good. Not petty. Not spiteful. Just clean. Later that day, I got a text from my cousin, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. I saw your sister's post. I just want to say, good for you. You've been their crutch for way too long. I smiled. Because behind every selfish daughter is a family who relied on her silence. But I wasn't silent anymore. That evening, Ava helped me frost cupcakes we made from scratch. We danced in the kitchen, just us, messy and laughing, no audience needed. And while the rest of them were passing blame like a bowl of stale chips, I was finally passing peace around my own table. No more guilt. No more explanations. Just this. They could no longer afford the daughter they threw away because she'd finally invested in herself. The emotional punch, the line that ends it all. It was just after midnight when I heard it. Muffled sobs. I was cleaning up the living room. Ava had fallen asleep on the couch after our movie night when I heard the crying through the thin walls of our shared apartment complex. At first, I didn't register it. But then I heard the voice. Familiar. Shaking. My mother's. She was on the phone. I couldn't hear the other person, but her words cut through the silence like a blade dipped in regret. I don't know what happened. She just shut everything off. We didn't mean to hurt her. We just didn't think she'd go this far. Everything's gone. The money. The car. The vacation. It's all gone. My chest rose, then fell. I didn't feel satisfaction. Not really. I just felt the finality of it. They finally realized the well had dried, and they weren't prepared for a life where I wasn't carrying the weight. Then came my father's voice, quieter, tighter. She's being cruel. And then the pause. Then the sound of my mother crying harder, gasping between the words. Why would she do this to us? I stood at the door, hand resting on the knob. There was a time I would have melted right there. Opened the door. Offered comfort. Softened my spine to hold theirs up again. But that version of me? She was gone. I knocked once. The crying stopped instantly. Then I opened the door just a crack, stepped into the hallway, and looked directly at my mother, slumped on the bottom stair, phone in her lap, eyes swollen. She stared up at me like I was a stranger. And maybe I was. I walked down one step. Just one. Just enough to look her in the eye and say, ask your favorite daughter. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to protest. But I didn't let her. I turned around, walked back inside, locked the door behind me. Not in anger. Not in spite.
In peace.
Because there's something powerful about not needing to yell to be heard. There's something divine in watching people sit in the emptiness they once handed you. I poured myself a glass of water, covered Ava with a blanket, brushed a curl off her cheek and whispered, "You'll never have to beg for love." And I meant it. They had called me selfish for choosing silence. But they never saw what it cost me to stay. Now, the cost belonged to them. And the invoice was past due. It's been 3 months since the empty box. 3 months since I shut every open tab I'd left in their lives. Accounts, favors, financing, forgiveness. And in that time, something wild happened. I started to breathe differently.
Slower.
Fuller. Like I finally had lungs that belonged to me. I didn't return the messages. Didn't show up for the fake peace offerings. Didn't respond to the vague social media posts meant to guilt me back into place. I just lived. I watched Ava thrive, really thrive. She laughs louder now. She dances in the kitchen without flinching. She draws without asking, "Do you think they'll like this?" Because we don't live for them anymore. We live for each other. And one day, as we baked together a small cake, just because she asked me, "Mama, do you still love Grandma?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I finally had a different one. "I love the version of her I hoped she could be," I said. "But sometimes, baby, the best love you give is the kind you give to yourself." She nodded slowly and smiled like she understood more than a 7-year-old should. And maybe she did, because she saw it all. She saw me exhausted from giving. She saw me forgotten in the middle of giving. And now, she sees me whole because I stopped. I used the vacation money they never repaid to take Ava to a mountain town for her spring break. We hiked.
We sang.
We made our own traditions. I used the refund from the family trip to start an online baking business. Ava helped me name it the second slice. Because that's what we're doing now. Living the life we should have had. The slice we were always too polite to ask for. Now ours, and full of flavor. Orders are growing. People love it. And I love that the first cake I ever baked without their approval became the first step toward freedom. As for my parents, their world is smaller now. No more free rides. No more hidden support. And the sister they prioritized? Turns out, favoritism doesn't pay rent. Last I heard, they're still waiting for someone to help them catch up on bills. But I'm not their someone anymore. I'm the woman they underestimated. The one they handed an empty box and expected to smile.
And I did. But now?
Now I fill my own boxes. With joy. With peace. With enough. We celebrated Ava's 8th birthday last weekend. Just us. A few friends. Laughter that wasn't forced. And as she blew out her candles, she whispered to me, "This was the best birthday ever." I hugged her and thought,
yes.
Because it wasn't borrowed from someone else's approval. It was built with love. Our love. The kind that doesn't come with conditions or comparisons. Just care. They handed me an empty box and laughed. But they didn't know I was already full. I gave them everything until I realized the best gift was keeping it for myself.